And finally, a novel approach to open peer review, Scott Kobner.
Hello everyone, my name is Scott Kobner, and it's an honor to be here presenting the work that my colleagues Derek, Michelle, and I have been putting together over the past several months. Today I'll be discussing a novel publication format for open peer review commentary and its observed effects on an emergency medicine blog that I work for. So to begin with some background, Academic Life in Emergency Medicine, or ALiEM, is one of the premier free open access medical education blogs that exist to date. In the last year, we reported about 1 million views alone. In 2014, ALiEM was the first open access medical education online resource to deploy its own open peer review process in order to enhance the scholarly value and rigor of the work that was published to our site from submitted contributors. And this model of open peer review publication, which I'll refer to for the rest of this talk as our traditional model, consisted of an attributed expert peer review commentary being addended to the bottom of post content with full access for readers upon post publication. After about 114 posts published in this manner, we saw a potential untapped pedagogical value in revisiting how this peer review content was published for our viewership. And because a blog is not beholden to the limitations of a traditional print publication, we sought to devise a unique method of publishing our reviewers' commentary that fully utilized our publication's medium. And we call this method inline. I have a quick video to display a simple bit of the custom HTML and CSS styling that goes into displaying this reviewer commentary throughout the body of our post content, hopefully engaging readers with hover over functionality. The video demonstrates it in action, and you can see at the bottom of each post, we still publish the full-length reviewer commentary so that reviewers can expound upon the short inline form comments that they intertwine throughout the article. We base this innovation off of an educational theory known as Meyer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning, which led us to the following two hypotheses for our study. All right. First, we believed that the inline would encourage readers to spend time actually reading this published peer review commentary. Thus, we expected readers to spend more time on pages that featured this inline format. And secondly, we reasoned that inline would actually engage our readers to interact with our peer review content, increasing the likelihood that they would click on this content, as well as increasing their interaction with parts of the web page that featured the commentary, which we were able to measure using an analysis of scrolling down the page. So to test these hypotheses, we developed a prospective randomized ABN split test trial, which is a standard experimental methodology in web design and development. First, we selected a representative post from our new submissions queue and recruited 2 peer reviewers to generate 3 versions of the same post content. One featuring our inline formatting, one using the traditional open peer review formatting that we've already employed, and finally a control post which did not feature any expert peer review content. Over the next 30 days, we randomized all visitors to our website to view one of these 3 post versions in a 1-to-1-to-1 allocation ratio by using a custom Google Analytics experiment. We then recorded analytics data using an array of industry standard analytics tools shown below. We then repeated this process for another post and combined our data into the following 3 categories. Overall, 2,365 web visitors from 894 cities across 84 countries participated in this study. There was no statistically significant demographic differences between groups after randomization, and bounce rates between groups across all 3 web pages were not significantly different. So in order to study the time users spent on each blog post, we adopted a measure known as active time, and I think this warrants a little bit of explanation. Essentially, every 5 seconds, users' computers would notify our servers if a user had met 2 conditions. One, if they either clicked or scrolled on the content on our webpage in those previous 5-second interval, and if the tab of our content was the active tab in the user's browser at that time. If these conditions were not met, our servers would fail to receive a notification during the next 5-second interval, and the user was considered idle, no longer interacting with the content on our page. From this data, we performed a Kaplan-Meier survival analysis and found no statistically significant difference between the 3 groups of our study. Median time spent on each page for control, traditional, and inline groups were 50, 50, and 45-second intervals, respectively. As one measure of interactivity, we analyzed users' clicks on pages featuring inline and traditional commentary formats, as our control page lacked any expert peer review content which users could interact with. On the left side of the slide, you can see a heat map of all the click impressions of the peer review commentary boxes from the 2 sets of posts that featured this content. And as you can see, we found a statistically significant increase in the number of clicks placed on peer review content compared to all other clicks on the page on blog posts featuring inline. Finally, we measured user scroll activity along the length of the web page. I like to call this the millennial Western blot. Each column on this slide is a screenshot of the actual web page displayed to our study participants. You can imagine it as one continuous print scrolling down the web page. Our analytics software tracked every user's scroll activity along the page, and whenever a user stopped scrolling, it captured the area of the website they were viewing. These columns represent summative heat maps for all scrolling activity during our experiment. Areas that are white to red represent areas that users stopped scrolling more frequently, and darker areas represent content that was more frequently scrolled past or never scrolled to at all. Like a Western blot, I can really only interpret this data qualitatively, but I'll argue that there are 2 trends. First, you can see that the web pages with inline saw more activity over text content compared to the traditional and control pages. And secondly, as most clearly demonstrated in the second set of posts, inline appears to increase the depth that users scroll where our summative peer review content was historically located. So in accordance with our findings, we believe that inline does not appear to increase the amount of active time users spend on blog posts when compared to the traditional format of peer review content that we display, or no peer review content at all. However, inline may improve the visibility of this peer review content as users appear to click and scroll on this content more frequently on posts featuring our inline publication format. Of course, these conclusions are with limitations. One major limitation of our study was that we measured active time in increments of 5 seconds. There may in fact be a difference between the reading times that users spend on our traditional inline and control posts, but given the actual amount of content in the number of words differing between these posts and the average reading time of our audience, it probably would be hard to detect looking back. Additionally, we offered direct URLs to our posts because they have to be published somewhere online for our visitors to access them. So it's theoretically possible that these URLs could be directly accessed bypassing our randomization, although there's no evidence to believe that occurred to a significant degree in our study. But it's an important theoretical consideration for people looking to replicate this methodology or improve upon it. And finally, our results are likely not super generalizable given that we studied a very limited quantity and variety of blog posts on a very specific emergency medicine blog. For future studies, we would like to try to get more qualitative impressions about readers' interactions with the inline format, as well as more measures of cognitive load that would enable us to understand how this publication format actually interacts with users while they're reading the content that they came to the blog to read. And finally, we hope to take some kind of measure of reader comprehension in our ultimate goal of these studies to see if we can actually improve the way people learn by using peer review commentary in this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Questions? Trish.
Hi, Trish Groves from the BMJ. I just wanted to say thank you. I have never seen such tweetable slides. They're amazing. They're really amazing. As you're probably aware, there's a huge fight going on out there about whether or not conferences should be live tweeted and whether slides should be photographed. And I assume that's your intention. If it's not, it's too late because they're out there. And this is great because you've got the limitations, so thanks.
Thank you very much.
So thank you for, this is Vivian Bachelet from Chile. Thank you for sharing negative results. I did find listening to you a bit spooky though. It's as if it's like not Big Brother, but Big Doctor looking on, and seeing what we're doing when we're surfing on the web. So I think you have a lot of analytical power there, and I wonder you're an MD, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just it really freaks me out to think what those who actually devote themselves to this are doing, and knowing how our behavior is on the web.
Yeah, I think
and there's also some ethical stuff, that comes to mind, but I don't know if you can comment.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that was one of the main impetus for us to run this study through the UCSF IRB. And we did a lot of research on a lot of the analytics ethics that exist for corporations like Google, which actually has an incredibly robust code of conduct policy for Google Analytics and actually limits the amount of individual user data that you're actually able to even capture. So most of the data, such as demographic information and location based information, is much more collected in an aggregate. And it does raise a lot of very important ethical questions, I think, moving forward with future studies into the level of data that we're able to obtain and the amount that users are aware of it. For our website and many others, as you might have this notification in your browser that comes up asking you to accept cookies that are in place. Most people just like blindly ignore it or probably don't know what that means. But pretty much every major website and software application in the world today is using that to track similar data, and probably, like you mentioned, have a very cursory understanding of the depth that we could go with analytics, and in some ways I hope to keep it that way because it is very kind of big brotherish, as you mentioned. But it's important to understand and to be aware of.
Joe John, South Carolina Medical Association. Thank you very much. E-medicine has always been kind of at the cutting edge. Two quick questions. What does what you do have to do with emergency medicine in the people who interacted with your blog? And two, since you can time how long the reader may be scrolling, can you give us an idea of how long it took for reviews to get done, since you could possibly even time them as well?
Yeah, great questions. So what I do in emergency medicine, our website, all the content is basically either divided into major categories revolving around the clinical practice, medical education, and reviews of emergency medicine research, essentially. So that's kind of the emergency medicine aspect of the post that we publish. As far as the review time, that's something we also want to really look into in future studies to see if the reviewer impressions essentially of an inline publication format, how long it takes them to actually put together this method of coming up with these reviews. Just anecdotally, I think it's probably faster and easier for reviewers in the sense that I think everyone in academics is very accustomed to tracking changes in a Word document at some point, whether editing their own manuscripts or a mentee's manuscript. And the process we use is very similar to that, employing Google Docs to handle most of that work. But yeah, it would be great to get data on that.
Thanks.
David Trager, UCLA Emergency Medicine. Very nice study. Have you considered a format where instead of using a peer review of the secondary literature, which is essentially what you've studied, that your blog post consists of comments laid onto the primary literature, so that what the reader would be seeing would be the original paper for those that are in open access, followed by the blog essentially inserted into that to see if that format would work?
Yeah, I think that would be an incredible study and definitely the next direction forward. Just given the submissions that were available to us on ALiEM's website, getting that primary literature to the review was just not possible. But I would definitely love to see that as well.
Thank you.
Hello, Christine Rasmussen from the Nordic Cochrane Center. I was wondering about the pedagogical aspect of it, and kind of inspired by looking around this room. Your presentation is competing with a lot of laptops and smartphones and things like that. Were you sort of also investigating whether or not it increased sort of attention on the topics, or were you more trying to sort of, just figure out what people were hovering?
Yeah. So initially we started from the place of studying, just given the feedback we had on our published peer review content and the kind of Twitter storms that sometimes ensued based on some of our reviewers' commentary, that there was a lot of education going on in that discussion that otherwise was going to be buried in an addendum published online somewhere that many viewers would never even access. And so in studying the pedagogical aspect, we thought that by juxtaposing these reviewer commentaries within the body of the post, we'd actually be able to start perking the reader's own thoughts about these issues and maybe start generating their own ideas about some problems with the information that's presented or future directions. Unfortunately, in our study, we weren't ever really able to capture that. We wanted to just see in this pilot if it was something that was even feasible for our blog. But in future studies, the cognitive load aspect that I talk about would be the first step in that assessment to see if having all these links scattered throughout the text of an article and so much other content to hover over is going to overload users' ability to even embrace the original author's content, or if it's going to help reduce that load overall.
Denise Goodman from Chicago. A follow-on to your comments. This kind of whizzed by, so apologies if I got the information wrong. But I thought you mentioned that the time on each page was 50-some seconds. And so that's way less time than most people spend reading a medical article. And so can you comment a little on the implications of that for the consumption of the medical literature if people in blogs or web accessed material are spending such little time reading it?
Yeah, definitely. I think that overall, the length of a blog post and the style that a blog post is written for is very different. Our average post for submissions anywhere range between 500 to 1,500 words, which is significantly shorter than some of the longer, like 14-page articles in like primary literature. I also think that the F-style formatting that we utilize for online publications kind of enables readers to jump to areas of the article that might be of more value or interest. So for instance, one of the blog posts that was presented was from our Trick of the Trade series, which really helps to translate clinical expertise from more senior clinicians to newer clinicians. And in that post, potentially you might only need to access the one part about how to perform a certain procedure. In fact, we might only be capturing some people who are re-referencing that post just for that one learning point. So I definitely think it shows that blogs have a potential to translate knowledge in a different way, and the length of the overall publication definitely contributes to a shorter reading time, but I'm not sure what implications it has for these readers who are then consuming other sources of medical literature and their reading habits on those sources as well.
Thank you.
Hal Sox from Pecori. As I looked at your Millennial Western blog, I really thought, here's a diagnostic test, and the intensity of the red is sort of the index test. But then the question is, what's the gold standard? What's the outcome? To what degree does the intensity of time spent reflect either great material or stuff you really having trouble understanding? So what's the next step?
Yeah, so I think the gold standard for looking at how users interact with either text-based content or multimedia content would probably be like eye tracking studies, where you can actually, obviously it's a lot more intensive than just putting something out online, where we can actually visualize what users are looking at, the amount of time that they're spending, and then following it up with some measure of comprehension or qualitative measure of impression to understand if those were areas they were having trouble understanding or if they were more intensely focused for another reason.
Thank you.
Last question, thanks.
Hi, Laura Oldock from Baltimore. And I had, I guess, a similar question. I wonder, you concluded that the time bin was too long, and I wonder how you differentiated between idle users and readers who were reading intently.
So the process of determining active time was measured in those 5-second intervals, and there was also, it's like a little bit more complicated than that. There's a 30-second idle period in our methodology that enables, if you haven't triggered either a scroll or a click in 30 seconds, you're given this 30-second grace window of you're just reading this part of the article, and then it could pick up again. So it'll resume your active time on the page.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
So, Scott, I think there's huge potential for not just what you're doing on your blog, but also using this methodology for advancing the whole field of peer review research. So I'm sure you'll be inundated with offers of collaboration, and I look forward to seeing you in 4 years' time with a whole load more data. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, everyone.